You ever find the older you get, the less you seem to care about some of those big goals that you did even 5 or 10 years ago? Yes, now that I'm 55, I certainly feel like there's a lot of things that just don't matter anymore. I prioritize my life in such a way that I keep only the important things close, and some of those nice to haves, those goals, those objectives that I once felt were important, they're going away. I don't care anymore. Anyway, welcome back to The Hustle and welcome back to The Grind, everybody. Thanks for joining in today. Let's break this down. I've got 8 of these major goals that I thought were so important, so critical to my life many years ago. Now it just doesn't seem to matter. I've been through a lot of life changes, marriage, kids, and now unfortunately losing some parents, losing cousins, friends, coworkers. A lot of change in the life has really changed my outlook and perspective on life now. And seriously, not much of those goals even matter anymore. Now there's all other things that do matter a lot more, and we'll get into those on another time. Okay, let's take this right from the top. And the first one is hard working. I've grown up, clearly I've developed a lot of leverage by working hard. If I haven't had the smarts up top, then I've always found ways to physically do it. And working harder with your hands, faster, longer, stronger, I've always found, that I can pop out ahead because I've never been shy of work. Certainly working in a farm, working construction, working a lot of physical jobs. And then later in life, I started transitioning more to leadership roles and more thought process. Of course, engineering minds, of course, definitely think a little differently. But, the idea of working harder just doesn't make much sense anymore. Now that I'm 55, I'm starting to see the writing on the wall. Whether I can't physically do it, which I can right now, the idea of holding that pace just doesn't make any sense. The old adage, work smarter, not harder, definitely applies. And the concept of just physically doing more and more and more, burning the candle at both ends, physically working, calluses, just doesn't make much sense anymore. What are we working for? We've worked for that last 30 or 40 years. What's the point in continuing to work at that pace? No, we always have to work. Work is productive. A lot of people use that productivity to feel good about themselves, feel good that they're moving forward. Maybe you're building a shed, maybe you're painting the house, whatever. That's productive. It makes you feel good. But do you need to do that in double time? Do you need to go double pace, work 18 hours a day? Those days are done. And now as, I get up in age and in my 50s, certainly. And once I hit that 50 mark, it definitely felt like that trigger. And, maybe that's part of the reason that a lot of older, ageism does kick in the corporate environment. Maybe it is true. Maybe they see a lot of the older workers as less capable. Maybe it's not less capable. Maybe it's just less motivated to do that physical work, chase around, look like Tasmanian devil. Rather, maybe it's more about just trying to work with this rather than with the fingers and the toes. And that's probably a part of the reason they don't see older workers as being as motivated as a hustle, when that couldn't be further from the truth, but a lot of it's perception. Either way, perception or not, once you sort of hit the 50s, I realize you start thinking more with the top and a little less with the hands, because ultimately we can't do it forever. Another one is a simple one, materialism. We all like our nice toys. We like things from time to time and like to look good when we're, wear our dancing shoes when we head out, to a party, and maybe we want to look good. There's certain things and certain elements that we know that we can polish up real nice. But nothing looks more awkward than going to a wedding with that suit, that baby blue suit that you wore last time back in 1974. So yeah, sometimes you just have to sort of keep up, and sometimes it's nice to be fresh, going to a big wedding, going to a big party. But generally speaking, if you look at the outfit, McGiddy up here, I'm not doing a whole lot extra. I don't believe in the idea of excess materialism. And that's a big thing that seems to grab this culture today. And unfortunately, that's a big reason why there are so many people living way outside of their means. And it's because a lot of times people worry too much about the look, the style, what's latest, what's greatest. And I see this all over. Open up magazines, GQ magazines, Vogue magazine, it doesn't matter. Check magazines everywhere, billboards, you see it, TV, advertisements, everywhere. There's always a focus on looks, style. Do you have the latest style? Oh, spring's outfits are out now. Does it matter? You know what? I'm not wearing a spring outfit. I'm not wearing the latest and the greatest, and I'm fine with that. I'd like to think I don't necessarily look like a hobo, but if I do, I'm okay with that too. Because ultimately, as long as I'm comfortable, as long as everything's, I'm fully dressed, everything's good and in good working order, It doesn't matter. I don't need the latest and greatest style. And certainly that transitions us in, of course, to the next one is trends. That's yet another one. Getting away from these trends, not just fancy clothes and expensive items like watches and, those fancy tidbits that people buy and constantly bury themselves in debt just to acquire. Trends are the next one, because a lot of times people are constantly chasing the trends, the latest iPhone, the latest pair of shoes. There's a style of shoes, the latest Nike shoes, it doesn't matter. You know what? Following trends is the quickest way to accelerate yourself into poverty. And quite honestly, just not worth it. Once you hit 50, it's not that you stop caring about the way you look. It's not that you stop caring about, what maybe your spouse or your better half actually thinks about you. On the contrary. But it really matters a lot less what the general world thinks about you. Because where do you see these people? Walking in a mall, maybe at the gas station. You walk by somebody, they see you. Maybe they don't think you're wearing the latest and greatest high top runners. Maybe they think your hat is sort of old school. It's a dad hat instead of possibly something more trendy. Trends are something designed to consume a person's wealth or essentially push you and accelerate you into poverty. Now again, if there's that thing and you're a collector of hats, you do you. If you're a collector of whatever, that's fine. But the idea of just trying to keep up with all the trends, you'll never do it. The latest watches and phones and cars, technology, none of that really matters. Do what you need to do to make yourself comfortable. If you have a hobby, absolutely exploit it and enjoy it. We only live once. But the idea of following all these modern trends, you'll never keep up, and why even bother trying? Another thing I realized once I hit 50, I just don't give a damn anymore what the neighbor's driving. They roll up in a new Benz and I just look at that and I sort of chuckle. And I think, okay, well, great, that cost you $100,000. All right, that's $100,000 less than you'll have somewhere else that you can actually use it. Or somebody's got to expand on their house or build all these extra extensions on their house and think, wow, that must have cost them an extra $80,000 to build that out. The idea of trying to compete with your neighbors, trying to compete with your coworkers, trying to compete with even your friends, there's no point. Once I hit 50, even honestly, shortly before that, and now even more so now that I'm 55, it's even more exaggerated. I just don't give a damn what the Joneses are doing. Let the Joneses go down in flames. If we're being honest with you, it doesn't matter. Let them take all that money and burn it into the corporate ground, because it's just simply not worth it. Trying to compete with people that just get hung up on having the latest and greatest and try to outdo the neighbors, let them do it. The flip side is, you got to think about it. If you are one of those people trying to compete, and you're trying to be like the Joneses, or you are one of the Joneses, you'll never be that top up. Okay, your neighbor buys that new Benz. You buy that new upscale Beamer, and maybe you've outdone them. And now there's some bragging rights. Guess what? There's always somebody down the road maybe got a new Bentley, or somebody got a new Porsche. It doesn't matter. There's always somebody that's going to outdo you. So if you think you're playing a game of the Joneses, think again, because you're always going to lose that game. Another thing that just doesn't matter anymore. Do you remember growing up in school, junior high, elementary? It really mattered how many friends you had. It really mattered what all the other kids thought of you. And you actually put so much stock and value in what other people thought of you. You did so many things. Froshing, for example, you remember back in the days, there was things you'd get on board and do sometimes with other people, even though you didn't necessarily agree with it, just because you wanted to be popular. Well, guess what? Now I no longer care about that. Popularity contests are over. Don't even care, because all that does is drag you in and make you into somebody and something that you're probably not. There's quite often examples of that in the work environment, where you get together in a meeting and it's sort of what I call the mob mentality. You get into these meetings and everybody commonly thinks the same, or at least they express themselves. You get that typical alpha speaks up in a meeting, has some big ideas, and then all kind of the smaller bag lickers start following along and nodding and waving. Next thing you know, it goes from 1 to 5. Next thing you know, you have the majority of the room all agreeing. Well, you know what? Who cares what other people think? You know what? I'm more at an age now, once I've sort of hit that late 40s and certainly mid 40s, now 50 for sure, I started to really see that once I hit 50. And I mentioned this the last few years prior to leaving my organization, I really started to develop this independent thought and this thought of don't really care what other people are thinking. I don't care what the popular opinion is. I'm going to express mine. And it's not for sake of rude. This is not about being rude. This is not about being arrogant. This is not being a jerk. This is, though, speaking your own mind. You know what, we go through all these years and all these trials and tribulations, and yet we're willing to compromise all of our own personal beliefs and in some cases integrity just to be popular because we care what other people think. Who cares? Honestly, come 50, I don't give a damn what other people think. Yeah, I don't want to look like an absolute slob. There's still sort of that societal thing that goes on where, I mean, you don't want to walk out in society looking like an absolute catastrophe. But really, it doesn't matter. Largely, by and large, it doesn't matter what other people think about you. And for the most part, I just do what I'm going to do and really don't care about it. It's not a popularity contest. There's another goal that I just found myself not caring all that much about. Coming from sort of an engineering background, coming from a trades background. Even, for example, as an electrician, you run pipe. Everything has to be at 90 degrees perfect, level, perfect, plumb, level. You have to look at all those features. As well, engineering, your calculation of examples like arc flash energy. That matters. That's safety on the line. Perfection matters. Perfection matters in trades. Perfection matters in a lot of workplaces. It could mean the difference between going broke or making a fortune. It certainly has a huge impact in the financial world, has a huge impact in safety and utilities, and almost the entire business world really matters about perfection or as close to it as physically possible. But you know what? I gave all that up when I retired. And certainly as I got later in my life, not so much while I was on the job, but now that I'm retired, things just don't matter as much about being perfect. I hang that picture on the wall. I try to get it close. Didn't quite get it. Close enough. It'll look fine, right? Or you know what? You've got some scratches on your car. You know what? I touch up what I can. It's not perfect. I'm not going to spend $5,000 to get it resprayed anymore. Don't care. I'm going to touch up what I can, and I'm good with, 85% style look on it. I'm now at a point where it doesn't matter to be absolutely perfect. It's okay to relax a little bit. It's okay to just take it easy. It's okay to admit that we're humans and we're not perfect. The ideas of, trying to pursue perfection doesn't really matter like it once did. And granted, some of that's because when you're on the clock, it does matter. They're paying you for that skill. They're paying you for being a professional. They're paying you. And so ultimately there's a deliverable. And when there is that, there is sort of this attention to detail and certainly a focus on perfection. But as you age, like I have, and certainly even more so, once I sort of hit my 50s, and now definitely, no doubt about it, once I'm retired, I find perfection just doesn't matter. Good enough is kind of good enough. Another goal that I pretty much went bye-bye come the 50s. Honestly, probably a little bit earlier than that. But definitely I noticed that distinctive swing once I hit 50 into 55 in that range was people pleasing. I just don't care. You know what? There was a time when it mattered and I did everything in my power to say yes, yes, yes to the boss. And actually, even possibly to my demise, later on in life, it became less of yes, 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 and more about, well, actually, there was a lot more of that contrary thought process because as I gained wisdom, and maybe some of it's because my boss was half my age and, some would argue that, us old fuddy-duddies just can't tolerate having a boss younger than you. That's not it. That's sort of old thought process. There was a certain level of respect I had for my boss because of the intelligence, obviously, that he may have had, or at least, again, possibly a perception. But I treated I dealt out the appropriate amount of respect when needed. But what I did find was, as I got a little older in life, I also realized that, what am I trying to do? Who cares about what they think? Again, this goes back to the popularity contest conversation about being in school. But realistically, the idea of people pleasing is jeopardizing your own integrity and beliefs because of trying to keep other people happy, trying to keep the peace, as it were. There was a time when I would just sit in a quiet meeting. If you were to say 10 years ago, I might sit in a meeting quietly and not mention my ideas because for fear they might go swerve around the general consensus. In many cases, I had a lot of those. It was always on the tip of my tongue, but I never wanted to speak out. Have you ever been in those situations where you're a little shy, a little nervous, you knew it was going against the grain, so you sort of held off? Well, that's people pleasing in some regards. quite honestly, don't give a damn. I pretty much let that ship sail many moons ago. And so sitting in meetings more recently, up to the last, say, 5 years, it was more of I was expressing my thoughts. I was expressing my ideas. If the manager came over to me and said, hey, Mark, this is this, and this is that. Can you get that done? Well, then I'd kind of have to say, well, actually, if we do it like this, that may in fact have better results. Get the conversation started. Usually it wasn't rebutted with anything substantial, because in most cases, if I'm speaking up and I'm offering a contrary opinion, I've usually already thought it through in quite a bit depth. Because again, coming from electrical engineering background, you're always thinking the numbers, you're thinking the facts, the hards, the ones and the zeros. And so I found myself quite often very calculated and very dialed in to what solutions and answers were. So if I was going to deliver that and I was going to say, well, actually, I was actually going to provide some foundation to that. But more to the point, the idea of people pleasing went bye-bye basically once I hit 50. Well, and guess what? There's another goal. And it has to do with very similar ideas, but it comes down to the point of, you making decisions. Quite often, you look around, you say something, and you look at that person next to you. You're actually looking for their approval. Well, quite often I found myself in that predicament. And I think a lot of us do. A lot of us, sail through life hoping that people will approve and validate our opinions and our beliefs. Quite often that mattered to us. We cared. We cared what other people thought. We cared what they thought of us, what they thought of our ideas, and it mattered. We were looking for that internal validation that we were acceptable, that we were approved, our ideas were approved, that people liked what we had to say. And we looked around with this validation, looking for seek this validation. It doesn't matter anymore. Because most of the people you were looking for validation have less of this going on up here and certainly don't matter anyway. And as you roll through life and you get older and more mature, you realize most of those people don't matter that much, quite frankly. And really the only ones you want to have any kind of provide any validation to your ideas, pardon me, I'm walking through the little bit of a trees here, are those people that are closest to you, the ones that really matter the most. Your friends, close couple of friends, family, and a lot of those other people that are sort of a distant reach away that you were seeking for validation, they don't matter. Toss them to the curb. To be honest, if you're still working, they're really just irrelevant, really, for the most part, other than you have to cooperate at work with them. But more importantly, once you retire, you realize those people all disappear anyway, because I've spoken about this, how coworkers are not your friends. So realistically, put them at bay. Put them on the appropriate charging dock, if you will. Pardon the pun. But ultimately, don't worry about validation from people that don't matter. It really only matters maybe your spouse, your kids, possibly even a couple really close friends. The ones that would take one for you. Those are the only people that really matter, and the only ones you should look and consider any validation for your decisions. Anyway, with all of that said, everybody, please do hit that subscribe button. Love to see you on the next one. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.